So here's the deal, you guys. I decided to do something very different for this Halloween special. And we're going to talk about something that is very dear to a lot of video game fans' hearts. Especially fighting games. And you guys already know what I'm talking about. Mortal freaking Kombat. That's right, we're going to be doing a retrospective review on all three of the Mortal Kombat games. I'm going to be giving some of my personal opinions and some fan opinions along the way, just to give you a perspective of how these games were and how these games are still to this day. So, before I begin, make sure you guys subscribe down below and hit the like button. And make sure to hit the bell icon because it'll notify you whenever I have a new upload that is released. Mortal Kombat released back in arcades, and it was something that was very different than a lot of arcade games at the time. Sure, there were things like Street Fighter, and Street Fighter 2 recently came out relatively around that time. But no other game was quite like this. There was something unique and different about the fighting style, and most importantly, there was gore in this game. Win. That's right, you would punch characters' faces and blood would fly out. You do certain moves and blood would fly out. All these different things these characters could do. And everything was just straight up bloody, which was unseen in the arcades at the time. This game revolutionized games going forward in ways that we do not know and ways we definitely do know. Of course, seeing as this is a retrospective, I have to talk about it in detail. So the plot to Mortal Kombat is that there's a tournament hosted every couple of hundred of years. I believe it's that long. Gosh, this is supposed to be a retrospective. I can't even tell you how many years it is. They do this tournament to prevent the merging of Outworld and Earthrealm, which is by the evil Shao Kahn. Now, obviously, the main villain in the original Mortal Kombat is Shang Tsung, but he is Shao Kahn's right-hand man, and he relies on him to bridge that gap for him through this tournament. So if they win, they bridge Outworld and Earthrealm, but if they do lose, then that means everything stays the way it is and everything's fine. Kombat, at the time, was created using live actors that were implemented digitally into the video game. This, at the time, was revolutionary and created amazing looking graphics because, well, let's face it, they were real people. And originally, the concept was to go digital with it, but Midway didn't have the budget for it, so they decided to go this route. And as a result, we got something that looks a little bit more timeless, but also a lot more awesome. And at the time, this also made other things about the game very gruesome at the time. In '92, these graphics were insane, the fighting style was fluid, and this changed video game genres going forward. And a lot of games tried to implement this, but didn't have as much success such as Mortal Kombat did. The first Mortal Kombat game had a roster of only 7 characters at the time. Do you believe that? Now we have about 18 characters and stuff like that in more modern games. So back then, there was only Raiden, Johnny Cage, Sonya, Kano, Liu Kang, Sub-Zero, and of course, Scorpion. And through the tournament, you would have this ladder where you level up to each opponent and then beat them, going up to the highest tournament marking, which was Shang Tsung at the time. But before that, there was a sub-boss named GORO, which was a 4-armed Shokan, which was the mini-boss that you would have before Shang Tsung. And unlike the other characters of the game, GORO was actually a clay model that was used in stop motion. Which isn't surprising, but at the same time, what is surprising is the fact that they made it look so good to the point that it looked like other actors who were in the game. Well, actresses as well. To me, that was the most difficult boss. Now, I wasn't around during the time that the original Mortal Kombats were out, but I did play through them. And let me tell you right now, this game was very difficult, and you can definitely feel its age. Now, don't get me wrong, at the time this is a very revolutionary game, but in some ways it didn't really age too well, especially considering the slow-paced combat and the sloppiness of a lot of it. However, it did set the mark for what was going to happen later, so I cannot complain about that. And aesthetically speaking, it's a very gorgeous looking game. Of course, I cannot talk about Mortal Kombat without talking about something that set the trend going forward, and that thing is fatalities. That's right, fatalities. Every single individual character in the game was given their own separate fatality. For example, it's a finishing move that they use to kill off an opponent, whether it's burning someone alive,
Scorpion wins. Fatality.
Pulling someone's beating heart out of their chest, or ripping someone's head off with a spinal cord still attached. Fatalities revolutionized the gaming world forever, and specifically is what made Mortal Kombat very special. The game was a big hit, and it had reached multiple audiences, and they thought this game was fantastic. Well, mostly everybody thought it was fantastic. At the time, communities were furious about the blood and violence, and they decided to create new rating systems to compensate for this. And they completely censored the game on the Sega Genesis. And Nintendo, but we don't talk about that. But entering in a certain code brings back the blood, but nobody really knew the code at the time, so it didn't really matter. And it set a new rating system for games going forward. So in that way, it did change the gaming world for the better, and also changed it in a very dramatic way. Funny enough, Mortal Kombat was originally not going to be, well, Mortal Kombat. It was originally going to be a video game based on the movie that Jean-Claude Van Damme was, and it was called Bloodsport. And they wanted to originally call the game Kumite, but unfortunately they did not have licensing for that, so they eventually just settled on doing a game called Mortal Kombat. Why spell it with a K though? Well, a worker did it as a goof, and it kind of stuck with it. It's really funny to see how names are created and how games are created. But on the bright side, we got something that's truly special and still stands the test of time. It should come as no surprise as there should be a sequel to the original Mortal Kombat. Considering the original game did very well, it was only a matter of time before they came out with a sequel. And that game took everything that worked in the first Mortal Kombat and amplified it to 100. Because this game is still considered one of the best in the franchise. Still considered one of the best in the franchise. And by me personally, it's definitely one of the best in the franchise. Plot to Mortal Kombat 2 is basically after Shang Tsung had lost the first tournament of Mortal Kombat, he devised a plan with Shao Kahn to bring the tournament to Outworld to give them a home field advantage. And that way they can finally get to rule Earthrealm. Shao Kahn spares Shang Tsung for his great loss, restores his abilities, and allows him to fully join in the tournament at full strength, including a couple of new characters that are semi-bosses. Mortal Kombat 2 really expanded upon the roster it had in the previous game. There are tons of new faces that are seen, including one that is pretty familiar if you have played the first one. For example, there was a secret boss in the first Mortal Kombat where you would enter a certain code and you would fight a mysterious warrior, and at the time this warrior was unknown. He was wearing a green ninja outfit that possessed Scorpion's spear and Sub-Zero's abilities. He happened to be much faster than the player. It was eventually revealed that this character was in fact Reptile. And Reptile became a roster character in Mortal Kombat 2, and he is fantastic and a welcome addition to the game. Another returning face is Shang Tsung in the game, and Shang Tsung is now officially playable throughout the entire game. This is a big deal considering at the time there weren't too many games out there that allowed you to play as the boss in the prior game, let alone the sequel. There were only two characters that did not return in Mortal Kombat 2, Sonya and Kano, as nobody really played in them in the prior game, so Midway removed them.
It's official. You suck.
Of course, fatalities made a return, and some of these got a lot more nastier than Sub-Zero's spine rip in the previous game.
Fatality. Scorpion wins. Flawless victory. Fatality. Reptile wins. Flawless victory. Fatality.
Combat was much more smooth, and also you get to fight Shao Kahn at the end of the game, which felt proper considering he's been led up to at this point. And due to the fact that, chronologically, the canon endings for Mortal Kombat have always been Liu Kang's endings, his ending is that he basically stopped Shao Kahn, much like in the original tournament when he stopped Shang Tsung, basically making peace with Outworld and Earthrealm. Or so it may seem. Mortal Kombat 2 aesthetically is still one of the best looking Mortal Kombat games of all time. Just the way the Outworld looks, the otherworldly designs of the stages, and the most creepy designs ever with the most eerie music. It's truly something haunting, and it's something that works well to this day. And it's it's also the thing kinda as to why I did a retrospective on this in the first place. Mortal Kombat 2 has some of the best looking stages with some of the best looking music. I cannot deny that. I love listening to Mortal Kombat 2's music, and I also love a lot of the characters they did in this game. Now, they obviously improved upon them in the future, but at the time, this is amazing. And also, much like now with Mortal Kombat 11, Mortal Kombat 2 at that period was the highest selling game of all time at that point. So I came to no surprise that there was a third Mortal Kombat. So basically the story is very simple with Mortal Kombat 3, much more simple than the prior two. Basically Shao Kahn loses the tournament in the prior game, he realizes he might be screwed, and he decides to just screw it and tries to merge the realms anyways. Which, why didn't he do that beforehand? Yeah, there's a lot of issues going on with Mortal Kombat 3 if I'm being honest, and a lot of the fandom will agree. Number one, the roster. The roster is very unique and different and includes characters from the past and newer characters that are playable. However, there is no Scorpion. There is no Johnny Cage. There is no Raiden. Like, those other people can be ignored, but Scorpion, the mascot of the game, is nowhere to be seen.
Fatality.
The roster for Mortal Kombat 3 is one of the weirdest things I think I've seen in a fighting game. They completely removed a beloved character like Scorpion, and so many more have really weird redesigns. That takes some balls. But at the same time, it didn't really work. A lot of people were very unsatisfied with the roster they had at the time. The only exception being Smoke, which was a cyberized version that had a very similar spear move, with very unique abilities and a very unique thing.
Smoke wins. Flawless victory. Fatality.
Fatalities in Mortal Kombat 2 were much more gruesome, if anything. This one is definitely gruesome, but at the same time, a lot of the fatalities are much more humorous. As a matter of fact, there's a much more humorous tone to Mortal Kombat 3, despite its apocalyptic atmosphere that the stages present and the story presents. It's supposed to be apocalyptic, but they don't take themselves really that serious, considering a lot of the stuff and fatalities tend to be a lot more silly and goofy.
Jax wins. Fatality. Fatality. Finish him. Liu Kang wins. Flawless victory. Fatality.
I mean, there's literally a fatality where Cabal scares the ghost right out of your body. That is some humor right there.
Finish him. Wins. flawless victory.
To be fair, I'm gonna say this right now. Aesthetically, the way the game plays, this is the most crisp, nice looking, and most fluid game out of all three of the games. It's definitely, in terms of the combat, I think it's the best one. This has the other two beat in terms of the combat. But when you're looking at the game overall, it really seems to be very lackluster, and that was the point and that was the problem at the time for Mortal Kombat 3 for a lot of people. Mortal Kombat 3's roster had a very interesting roster. For example, old designs were changed, such as Jax with his new metal arm upgrades that were not apparently there in the last prior game, or newer characters like Cabal, who has a very interesting scarred up design that's very mysterious, or someone like the Cyberlin Quay, where they have a very different robotic aesthetic to it, very much in line with the Earth aesthetic. But the most controversial has been Sub-Zero, and I agree, it is not a great design, and it definitely does not match the fact that he's based on an Asian man, and it's just a very weird direction. Mortal Kombat 3 really let a lot of people down, which led into Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, where they expanded upon the roster and added in new fatalities and new stages, which is the more, let me just say, it's probably my favorite outside of 2. Like, Mortal Kombat 2, I think, is the best in terms of everything, but Mortal Kombat 3, in terms of its gameplay and its roster, is the best, because it has all the characters that you would expect and love, and at the same time, it basically does everything well that worked for Mortal Kombat 3 and just amplified it. Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 was definitely a warm welcome, although not having too many console sales, which put them a little bit on a hiatus for a couple of years.
Wins.
Which then led into a 3D era of Mortal Kombat, which I'm not going to discuss. But overall, Mortal Kombat changed the gaming world forever, and that is undeniable. It's been something that's been very unique and different to gaming. At the time, there were finishing moves, but there was nothing like fatalities where you gruesomely kill your opponent like that, or really just be gruesome throughout the entire game. This revolutionized the gaming world forever, and it's never going back after this. This is something truly special. The original trilogy of Mortal Kombat is always going to be golden, but is it outdated? I think not. Mostly because Mortal Kombat 2 really holds up high, and is still a fan favorite to this day. And think to yourselves this, if you don't like the originals, and you like the newer ones, do remember what set up the groundwork for the originals to exist. This has been Isaiah Tots. Thank you very much for watching this retrospective. And as always, if you guys liked the video, make sure to subscribe today to join the Isaiahization. I can sense.
Get over here!